6-year-old girl was thrown into a river by her own father, but was miraculously saved by a millionaire, uncovering a web of hidden crimes in the aftermath. Behead, starting today's story, please adjust the volume on your device to a comfortable level so as not to affect your health, and have the most comfortable moments with our characters. On a sun-drenched afternoon, on an empty steel bridge spanning the deep waters of the Red Leaf River, a sharply dressed man in a grey suit gripped his 6-year-old daughter's wrist with calculated coldness. The girl, little Emma, dressed in a pink sundress, wept uncontrollably, pleading with tearful eyes as she struggled to pull away. With chilling resolve, he hoisted her up over the railing. "You've ruined everything," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Now you'll never get in my way again." And just like that, he let go. But what he didn't see, what he never could have imagined, was that someone else had been watching. Charles Bennett, a grieving millionaire still mourning the recent loss of his own young daughter, was driving toward the cemetery, his weekly ritual of remembrance. As his car approached the bridge, a flash of motion caught his eye. A child's small figure tumbling through the air. Without hesitation, Charles slammed the brakes, threw open his door, and bolted towards the edge. There was no time to think. He dove into the churning waters below. Seconds later, he surfaced with Emma in his arms, her body limp but alive. Gasping and coughing, he cradled her close as he swam them both to the riverbank. There, soaked to the bone and shaken to the core, Charles wrapped her in his coat. Emma said nothing. Her lips blue from the cold. Her eyes locked on the man who had just saved her life. She didn't know who he was, but something in her tiny heart told her this man was not a stranger. The bridge itself, usually quiet and forgotten, cast long shadows across the water, its iron beams humming softly in the breeze. The sky above, though still blue, hinted at an incoming summer storm. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting for this one improbable moment of intervention. Just hours earlier, that same bridge had led Emma to what should have been her end. Her father, Richard Miller, a powerful corporate figure from Los Angeles, had been riding high on a wave of deceit. But earlier that day, while presenting manipulated financial projections to an important client in the 40th floor boardroom of his downtown office, Emma had interrupted. "Daddy, the numbers are wrong," she'd said, her voice pure and matter-of-fact. 73.5% of 242 million isn't 193 million. It's 177,987,000. The room went dead silent. "And if you add all the growth projections," she continued, "you get 132%. How can something grow more than 100%? Richard's fiancée, the ever-poised Eleanor, had jumped in quickly, chuckling nervously. Kids and their imaginations, right? "Emma has a special condition. She mixes up numbers sometimes." But the damage was done. The client, an experienced investor with a sharp mind, called for a break. Within an hour, his team had verified what Emma had said. The data had been cooked, and worse, the implications pointed toward intentional fraud. Back on the bridge, Richard's rage had overtaken him. Emma, only 6, but born with a mind that saw the world in patterns and logic beyond her years, had unintentionally unraveled his empire. In his warped logic, she wasn't a daughter. She was a liability. And yet fate had sent Charles Bennett down that road. Not far away, in a small country town, Margaret Bennett, Charles's older sister, had been having recurring dreams. Night after night, she saw a red-haired girl in a pink dress standing alone near a river. Something about the child felt familiar. She hadn't told Charles yet, thinking it was just grief playing tricks on her. But when she arrived at her brother's estate to check on him, and found Emma there, curled up under a warm blanket in the guest room, her copper curls damp from the river, Margaret froze. "She looks just like Marina," she whispered. Marina, her daughter, who had died 6 years earlier giving birth. "She had a baby," Margaret said softly. "She told me she gave her to the father, that he had resources but no heart." Charles's breath caught in his chest. "You think this is—" "I don't think," Margaret said. "I know. That little girl is my granddaughter." From that moment on, Emma was no longer alone. Wrapped in love, she began to heal. Margaret moved into the house. Charles, rediscovering purpose, devoted himself to giving the girl a stable home. Emma, whose mind never forgot, found new peace in puzzles, books, and quiet walks through Charles's gardens. And every time she passed the bridge, she'd whisper, "The numbers brought me back." And they did. Because numbers don't lie, and neither does love. Not only had the $200 million 0-cents deal fallen through, but there were also murmurs of a potential investigation by the SEC into the company's shady accounting practices. Now, standing alone on a deserted bridge outside of Portland, Richard Whitman felt the full weight of years of deceit pressing down on him like a vice. Julia had been brutally clear. "She's too much of a liability, Richard. That compulsive honesty of hers is going to destroy everything we've built. You have to choose her or everything else. Your empire, your name, your future, and me." Just down the road, around a bend, a black SUV slowed to a crawl. Inside sat Charles Whitman, a grieving billionaire who, like clockwork, visited his daughter's grave every week. As he approached the bridge, something pulled at him, a disturbance in the air, a flicker of motion. Then he saw her, a small child teetering on the edge, held by a man in a grey suit. And then she fell. Back on the bridge, Richard looked into his daughter's tear-milled eyes. Emma clung to him, trembling, her tiny hands wrapped tightly in the lapels of his jacket. The pink dress she wore, her late mother's last gift, fluttered violently in the rising wind. "You're just like your mother," Richard muttered, more to himself than to her. "Always honest, always pure, never able to understand how the world really works." Then, with a motion as clean as it was cold, he hoisted Emma onto the railing. She whimpered, struggling. "Please, Daddy," her voice cracked. "I promise I won't talk about numbers anymore. I promise to stay quiet." For a fleeting second, something flickered behind Richard's eyes. Hesitation, maybe guilt, but Julia's face, her voice, and the image of everything collapsing pushed the feeling aside. His grip loosened. Emma's scream was swallowed by the roar of the river. But just as her small frame tumbled toward the water, the screech of tires and the slam of a car door cut through the air. Charles, still in his funeral suit, sprinted from the shoulder of the road. Without thinking, he leapt from the railing, diving into the surging current below. The icy water punched the air from Emma's lungs. The current was relentless, spinning her like a fallen leaf. In her brilliant mind, numbers collided. The water's velocity, the depth, the trajectory. But for once, her mathematical genius couldn't save her. Then, something solid. Warm hands gripped her arms. Not hooves, not fur, but strong arms, a tailored sleeve. A man. Charles fought the current, holding the girl close, using every ounce of strength to push toward the muddy riverbank. Gasping, soaked to the bone, he hauled them both onto the rocks and collapsed beside her, his chest heaving. Emma clutched his coat and didn't let go. Charles didn't know who she was or what had just happened, but as he looked into her tear-soaked eyes, something in him stirred, a memory, a grief, and an unshakable feeling. This child is not here by accident. Margaret Reynolds, a 70-year-old woman who lived on a modest farm near the Columbia River, was walking the bank that afternoon, cane in hand, searching for clarity. And for the peace she often found near the water. Her brother Charles, a reclusive millionaire who had recently lost his only daughter, had asked her to come visit. But Margaret had another reason. A recurring dream about a red-haired girl by a river had left her uneasy. That was when she heard something splashing. Urgent. Human. Her old instincts kicking in, Margaret moved as quickly as her arthritis would allow toward the sound. As she reached the edge of the riverbank, she spotted something that made her breath catch. A man in a soaked dress shirt was staggering from the water, cradling a small, limp girl in his arms. It was Charles. "Dear God," she whispered, rushing to meet him. Her cane dropped, forgotten in the grass. Charles gently laid the girl onto the muddy ground. She was alive. Barely. Her soaked pink dress clung to her tiny frame, and her lips were blue from the cold. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" Margaret asked, shedding her knit shawl to wrap around the trembling child. The girl didn't answer. She didn't cry, but she clung to Charles's shirt, fingers twisting into the fabric as if it were her only anchor. Her eyes darted around, counting, measuring. 7 trees, 23 stones, 82 seconds since she'd been pulled from the water. Her brain was moving faster than her body could respond. Margaret knelt close, trying again with a gentler tone, the kind she once used on the rescued animals she'd taken in over the years. "Do you have a name, honey?" The girl's lips moved, but no sound followed. She didn't speak, but her hands, her posture, even the way her eyes scanned the space, told Margaret she was special, unique. Then, something astonishing happened. As Charles knelt beside them, brushing the girl's wet hair gently from her face, she shifted. She turned toward him slowly, then wrapped her arms around his neck in a tight embrace. The man, who'd been stoic since his own daughter's funeral, felt his throat close up. "She's not just scared," Margaret murmured. "She's brilliant. You see it too, don't you?" Charles nodded silently, overcome. In 4 decades of caring for animals and people alike, Margaret had never witnessed such an immediate bond between child and adult. Her gut told her to call child services, to report what had happened. But something stronger made her pause. The girl's clothes were high-end. There were no adults around looking for her. This didn't feel like an accident. "We'll get you warm first," Margaret said softly, more to herself than to the girl. "Then we'll figure out the rest." Charles, soaked to the bone but laser-focused, gently lifted the girl again. Despite what she had just endured, she allowed herself to be carried, her small hands gripping his shirt like it was stitched from safety itself. Margaret led the way back toward the farmhouse. As they walked, the girl pressed her cheek to Charles's shoulder and let out a long, silent breath. As though, somehow, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As they made their way slowly up the dirt path toward the farmhouse, Charles couldn't help but notice how the last light of the day caught in Emma's curly red hair, making it gleam like polished copper. There was something oddly familiar about that shade, about the shape of her small, serious face, but he pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the present moment, making sure this mysterious child, who fate had quite literally thrown into his arms, was safe. The Whitmore estate, nestled quietly among the rolling hills near the Columbia River, was a place of understated peace. The 2-story house, its pale yellow paint gently peeling in places, stood surrounded by a garden that looked wildly unkempt, though to Emma, the chaos revealed clear mathematical patterns. She silently noted the Fibonacci spirals formed by the wildflower's growth and the symmetrical arrangement of the stone borders. Passing through the weathered wooden gate, Charles led her toward the stable, a sturdy, time-worn building that had been well maintained despite the years. Inside were 5 horses, each unique in size and color. Emma's sharp eyes scanned them all. A chestnut, 2 dapple greys, a paint, and a dark bay mare. Instinctively, she calculated the ratios of their heights, the distance between their stalls, and the exact amount of hay in each trough. "We'll start at the guest house," Charles said gently, helping her down. But Emma resisted, her small hands clinging tightly to his jacket sleeve. Sensing her distress, he didn't force her. "How about this?" he suggested softly. "We can stay on the porch for now. I'll grab you some dry clothes, and I'll stay close." Though Emma didn't reply, her shoulders eased slightly. Her eyes continued to study everything. The porch's layout, the chipped paint on the railing, even the fine lines on Charles's weathered face. It was as though she were imprinting a mental blueprint, cataloguing every contour and crease like they were coordinates on a map. Nearby, a creaky rocking chair swayed lightly in the late afternoon breeze. Emma immediately began nodding her head to its rhythm. Exactly every 2.3 seconds, Charles watched, fascinated, as she even synchronized her breathing to the wooden squeaks, as if the predictability of the motion grounded her in a world she couldn't yet explain. "I'll go find something warm for you to wear," he said, stepping briefly inside. When he returned, he held a faded t-shirt, likely left behind by a visiting cousin, and a pair of elastic waist shorts. "Not as fancy as your dress, but they're clean and dry." Emma eyed the clothes carefully, letting her fingers graze the fabric. Charles noticed how she avoided the spots with tags or thicker seams, clearly hypersensitive to textures. Once changed, Emma finally let him guide her through the front door. A gaze darted across the living room, quickly zeroing in on a wall lined with old family photos. One in particular seemed to hold her attention. A black and white snapshot of a young woman standing beside a horse. Something about it made her pause. Something perhaps she already knew. Among the many framed photos on the old mantel, one in particular caught Emma's eye. A black and white image of a smiling man standing beside a sleek young horse. "That's my late husband, Andrew," said Helen, noticing the girl's focused gaze. "Best horse trainer this valley ever knew. He had a way with animals, kind of like you do, sweetheart." Without a word, Emma reached out, tracing the outline of the horse with her finger. Then, almost instinctively, she adjusted her stance to mimic the horse's posture in the photo. Her head tilted, arms mimicking the forelegs. Helen blinked, startled. "Incredible," she whispered. "You've got some memory, huh?" Emma wandered over to a dusty side table, where a forgotten box of dominoes sat. With precise, practiced motions, she arranged the pieces into a perfect numerical sequence. Her tiny fingers moved like clockwork, deliberate, quick, and exact. Helen, holding a now cold mug of tea, watched in awe as the child revealed one astonishing ability after another. When Emma discovered an old crossword puzzle book, she completed 3 full pages in minutes, each square filled with flawlessly written letters. "You really are something special, aren't you, honey?" Helen said softly. "Different, but in the best way." Then, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the window panes. Emma instantly pressed her hands to her ears, her entire body tensing like a wire wound too tight. Eyes shut tight, she began rocking rhythmically, murmuring, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Helen recognized the prime numbers. The pattern seemed to soothe the child in a way words never could. Drawing from years of wisdom, Helen didn't try to stop her. She simply sat nearby, silent and steady, her presence a quiet comfort. From outside the window came the muffled sound of a car engine idling, the same black Lincoln that had pulled Emma from the river just days before. The sound seemed to reach Emma, even in her overwhelmed state. Slowly, her rocking eased. When she finally opened her eyes, they glistened with tears unshed, but there was also a spark. She had found a place where no one tried to fix her. Here, she wasn't broken. She was just Emma. Back in Seattle, Charles Whitmore sat alone in his penthouse office, high above the city. The skyline stretched endlessly behind him, but he didn't see it. A glass of untouched bourbon rested in his hand. His reflection in the window no longer looked like the powerful tech mogul who graced Forbes magazine. It looked hollowed out, haunted. "You did what had to be done," whispered Claire, placing her manicured hand gently on his shoulder. She looked striking in a designer red dress, but her smile was thin, calculating. Now we can move on. Build the life we talked about. No more complications. Charles said nothing. In his mind, the moment kept playing. The little girl's terrified eyes, her body falling through the air, the splash, the current. The instant he jumped in, heart racing, the need to save her overpowering everything else. He hadn't saved his daughter. But this girl he had pulled from death itself. Part of him wanted to believe it had been a dream, that Emma hadn't been real, but he knew better. Just like he knew Claire's suggestion to fake documents showing Emma was at a treatment center in Switzerland was a lie too far. We still need to wrap up the cover story, Claire continued, her voice brisk. I've already lined up the school paperwork. Charles didn't respond. His thoughts were drifting, not to his business empire or shareholders, but to a girl with copper curls who had drawn Fibonacci spirals in the dirt with a stick and whispered numbers like they were sacred. He didn't know, yet, that soon his sister, Margaret, would arrive with a look of stunned recognition and a recurring dream about a red-headed child by a river. He didn't know she'd identify Emma as her granddaughter, but deep down, he already felt the truth humming beneath his ribs. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a reunion written in the stars. If anyone asks, Emma is currently receiving top-tier treatment for her condition. The word condition rolled off Laura's tongue like venom, as though it left a bitter taste in her mouth. Charles felt a churning deep in his gut. How had he let this woman convince him that his own daughter was nothing more than a liability to be erased? Across the room, the news played softly on a local channel. The reporter discussed the incoming storms expected later in the week. No mention of a missing girl, no alerts about a child's body found in the river. It was as if Emma had never even existed. The staff has been briefed. Elena Von continued, her eyes fixed on her phone. The official narrative is your devoted father, doing everything you can by sending your daughter abroad for the best specialized care available. That should be enough to keep investors calm and protect the company's standing. Charles closed his eyes, and what flashed in the darkness behind his lids wasn't spreadsheets or shareholder reports, but the moment he first held his baby girl. The warmth of her in his arms. The promise he made to Maria, his late wife. I will always protect her. I'll be the best father I can be. Now, those vows felt like lies, suffocating him under the weight of betrayal. The client from yesterday called. Eleanor Vaughan shifted the topic abruptly, her voice tight with urgency. They're still considering reporting us to the SEC for the discrepancies Emma had pointed out. We need to act fast to control the fallout. The mention of his daughter's name made Charles wince. She was right, you know, he murmured, the first words he had spoken in hours. About the numbers? She was always right, Laura scoffed, clearly annoyed. And what good is being right if you don't know when to shut up? An autistic kid who can't lie has no place in corporate America, Charles. You've always known that. Meanwhile, far from the polished chaos of the penthouse, a different world pulsed with quiet warmth. Inside a rustic barn on the edge of a tranquil Oregon farm, Emma sat cross-legged on the hay-strewn floor, surrounded by curious horses. Her tiny fingers traced invisible shapes through the straw, while she whispered sequences of numbers under her breath. Primes, patterns, rhythms. Only she could truly comprehend. Margaret, standing at the barn's entrance with a steaming mug of tea in her weathered hands, watched the girl with quiet wonder. It wasn't her difference that unsettled Margaret. In fact, she found it beautiful. What gave her pause was the strange, lingering sense of déjà vu. The curls, the delicate structure of the girl's face. They pulled at something deep in her memory. But who was she reminded of? Inside the house, a TV played softly in the background. The sound drifted through the window, brushing across the barn like a ghost. For a fleeting second, the face of Charles Whitmore flickered across the screen in a business segment. Even without seeing it, Emma stiffened. Her fingers gripped the straw tighter, trembling. "Shh, it's all right, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, as she walked toward her, voice like a lullaby. "You're safe here." That night, as thunder rolled through the valley and lightning painted the sky with staccato flashes, two contrasting worlds unfolded. In his luxury high-rise, Charles sat alone, staring into the void outside his window. Sleep refused to come. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, so small, so afraid. Heard the splash, the silence. Eleanor Vaughn, just feet away, paced, playing the future like a deadly game of chess, calculating each move with the precision of someone who never left anything to chance. Back on the farm, nestled in an improvised bed in the barn, Emma slept more peacefully than she had since the day her world was ripped apart. Margaret, watching quietly from the doorway, made a silent vow to protect the girl fate had delivered to their doorstep. To fight for the truth, no matter the cost. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. At precisely 7:00 IE, the landline rang inside the farmhouse. Eleanor, already awake and stirring a pot of oats in the kitchen, picked up on the second ring. The voice on the other end made her grip the phone tighter. "Ellie, it's Margaret," said her younger sister, her voice hoarse and laced with fatigue. "I had that dream again, the one with the little girl." The wooden spoon in Eleanor's hand froze mid-stir. For 3 nights now, ever since Emma had arrived, Margaret had been calling about a recurring dream of a red-haired child. "Tell me more, Maggie," Eleanor urged, lowering the stove's flame. "It's always the same," Margaret replied, coughing faintly, her voice worn down by years of chemotherapy. "I see this little girl, hair like copper, wearing a pink dress. She's in danger, Ellie. And there's something about a white horse." Eleanor felt a cold chill crawl up her spine. She glanced through the kitchen window toward the guest room, where Emma slept soundly. "Maggie," she said slowly, "we need to talk, face to face." "I'm already on my way," Margaret replied. "Caught the first greyhound at dawn. Something told me I had to come." 3 hours later, a yellow cab pulled into the gravel driveway. Out stepped a frail elderly woman, her bald head wrapped in a colourful scarf. Her eyes, identical to Eleanor's, shone with a feverish urgency. "Where is she?" Margaret asked as soon as she stepped through the gate, wasting no time on greetings. "The girl from my dream. She's here, isn't she?" Before Eleanor could answer, the sound of footsteps crunching gravel interrupted them. Emma was walking toward them, side by side with Charles Whitmore, the reclusive millionaire who had pulled her from the river days earlier. The girl's slight frame matched his stride in perfect rhythm. As they approached, Margaret stumbled, clutching Eleanor's arm. "My God," she whispered, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. "It's her. She's the spitting image." "Spitting image of who?" Eleanor asked softly, though deep down she already knew. "Marina," Margaret sobbed. Her only daughter, who had passed away 5 years earlier. The same hair, that tilt of the head, even the way her fingers move, like she's counting something no one else can see. Emma watched the exchange with curious eyes, her fingers moving in that familiar rhythm, counting, tracking invisible sequences only she could recognize. "Marina was involved with a powerful man," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He was married. When she found out she was pregnant, she decided to raise the baby on her own. She told me the child would be special, different. But I never got to meet my granddaughter. Marina got sick soon after the birth, and before she passed, she said she had given the baby to the father." The weight of her sister's words hit Eleanor like a blow to the chest. "You're telling me that Emma is..." "Sophia," Marguerite interrupted, her eyes wide with realization. That's the name Marina always said she'd give her daughter, Sophia, just like Mum. At that moment, a distant roll of thunder made the little girl flinch. Charles gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent comfort. The simple protective gesture moved Marguerite to tears. Marina was always attuned that way too, Margaret murmured, her voice soft and full of memory. Loud noises overwhelmed her, and animals. She had this way with them, like she understood them without saying a word. Emma, with the grace only she possessed, slipped off Charles's armchair and quietly approached Margaret. Her eyes scanned the older woman's face, searching carefully for something familiar, like a puzzle piece she was trying to place. Then, to the astonishment of both siblings, Emma gently reached out and touched Margaret's colourful headscarf. 42, she said, her voice breaking a silence that had lasted for days. There are 42 flowers on this scarf. Margaret staggered slightly, her hand flying to her chest. Marina used to do that, she whispered, overcome. She'd count patterns in everything. It's how she made sense of the world. Charles stood back, amazed as he watched his sister and Emma form a quiet, profound connection. The child's fingers continued moving over the scarf with mathematical accuracy, while Margaret wept softly, the truth beginning to take shape. We have to uncover the truth, Margaret finally said, her voice growing steadier. If she's really my granddaughter, if her father is who I think he is, Marina deserves justice, and Emma deserves to know where she comes from. Just then, the afternoon news murmured from the living room TV. Charles was preparing a snack in the kitchen while Emma sat nearby, drawing intricate geometric designs in an old notebook. Margaret, resting on the couch, caught a glimpse of the screen and then sat bolt upright. The anchor was interviewing a prominent businessman about a recent acquisition. His name, Richard Matthews. Emma, without looking up, began reciting in a rhythmic monotone. 242,073.5%, 177,987,000. Margaret's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the man on screen. That's him, she whispered. That's the man Marina was involved with. Richard. On the television, Richard appeared polished and calm, but keen eyes might notice the dark shadows beneath his eyes, the subtle tremor in his fingers as he clutched the microphone. Yes, my daughter is receiving the best possible care in Switzerland, he said, in response to a question about Emma. As her father, it's my responsibility to ensure she gets the help she needs. Beside him, a striking woman in a navy mubble suit, Elena, flashed a pleasant smile and rested her manicured hand on his arm. We're very optimistic about her progress, she chimed in, her voice smooth and sweet. It's so important for special children to receive specialized attention. Emma stopped drawing abruptly. Her pencil snapped under the pressure of her grip. Her eyes, usually fixed on unseen patterns, now locked on the screen with a piercing intensity. Outside, Charles's golden retriever began barking nervously, as if sensing the shift in her energy. He's lying, Emma said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. The numbers lie. He lies. Charles and Margaret exchanged startled glances. What numbers, sweetheart? Margaret asked gently, moving closer. Emma reached for her notebook and with startling precision began replicating charts and figures she had once seen in her father's office. Her tiny fingers flew across the page, recreating complex financial data from memory. Here, she pointed at a set of figures, growth can't exceed 100%. That's not how math works, but he makes the numbers lie. Meanwhile, in his high-rise office, Richard was watching a replay of the same interview on his laptop. Every word about Switzerland, about care and love, cut deeper than the last. The untouched glass of whiskey on his desk reflected his face back at him. Tired, haunted. Great job with the interview, Elena said as she entered the room, casually checking her phone. Everyone bought the story. We just need to keep this going a little longer, then we can say she's thriving in Switzerland and chose to stay there." Richard said nothing. The screen flickered with his daughter's name, and he couldn't tear his eyes away. The lies had taken root, but his conscience refused to stay quiet. His eyes were locked on an old photograph resting on his desk. He and Emma on the day she solved her first advanced math problem at just 4 years old. The proud expression on his face in that picture stood in bitter contrast to the shame that now weighed heavily on his conscience. Across the country, back at the ranch, Margaret carefully reviewed the complex figures Emma had copied, with startling precision. As a retired math teacher, she recognized immediately that the discrepancies the child had pointed out weren't just minor accounting errors. "This isn't a simple case of cooked books," she muttered to Cecilia. "These are deep, systematic manipulations, millions involved. Emma must have seen these documents in her father's office, with her photographic memory. No wonder he tried to silence her." Cecilia, trembling with anger, nodded slowly. "It wasn't just because she's different, or because of that woman's influence," she whispered. "She's a threat, a witness." And as if to echo their conclusion, Emma began gently rocking back and forth on the porch swing, softly reciting dates and numbers in sequence, each one a clue, a breadcrumb revealing years of corruption. Just then, Charles Whitmore stepped onto the porch. The wealthy widower had recently taken Emma in after rescuing her from the river. Emma immediately stood and wrapped her arms around him tightly, burying her face in his coat. His hand rested gently on her head, silently promising safety. "We have to protect her," Margaret said, her voice carrying new strength despite the illness that had weakened her, not just from Henry, but from the entire web of lies she uncovered. Emma deserves to live somewhere her honesty is seen as a gift, not a danger. Cecilia gave her sister a knowing glance. Margaret had already stepped fully into her role as grandmother, but one question remained. How could they take down a man with so much power and influence? The answer came quietly from Emma herself. Pulling away from Charles just enough to point to her weathered notebook, she said simply, "Numbers don't lie. Numbers always tell the truth. Fate has a strange way of stepping in at the right time." That Wednesday morning, as Emma played in the dusty yard under Charles's watchful eye, a shiny black car pulled up to the gate. The chauffeur stepped out in a crisp suit and opened the back door. Out stepped a woman in stilettos. Elena. Her heels sank slightly into the dirt as she scanned the property. "What a charming little place," she muttered, her tone dismissive as she took in the scene. Rumors had led her here. Normally she would have ignored them. But one detail stood out and sent chills down her spine. A red-haired girl and a white horse. Cecilia, tending her rose bushes nearby, straightened as the footsteps approached. Her fingers tightened around the gardening shears in her calloused hands. Her instincts flared. Something was off. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly. "I hope so," Elena replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm looking for a horse, an Andalusian, white, went missing recently. I have reason to believe he might be here." Just then, a sharp neigh rang out from the barn. Charles's prized white horse, River, normally silent, let out a piercing cry. Elena spun on her heels toward the sound, eyes narrowing. Well, well," she said, stepping forward. "Looks like I found what I was looking for. It looks like I found what I came for." The woman's words were sharp, self-assured, but what happened next defied logic. From behind a tall oak tree, a small voice rose, a melody, soft and haunting. It wasn't a lullaby or a rhyme. It was numbers, sung in a slow, entrancing rhythm. 7, 13, 17, 23. Elena's body stiffened. Her face turned pale, drained of color. That voice, that particular sequence of prime numbers. It couldn't be. "Emma," she whispered, her mask of control shattering instantly. At that moment, Margaret stepped out onto the porch, steadying herself with her cane. Her eyes, dulled by illness, now sparked with clarity and conviction. "I knew someone would come," she said, voice calm but cutting. "I just didn't expect it to be you, Elena. Or should I say, Laura." Elena flinched, as if struck across the face. "How? How could you—" "Marina told me everything before she passed," Margaret said, taking slow steps forward. "About how her college friend, Laura, you, introduced her to your brother, Richard. How you changed your name and face after she got pregnant. How you wormed your way into their lives, always knowing about the child but hiding it so you could pull Richard's strings." Emma stepped out from behind the tree then, eyes locked on Elena with unnerving focus. Her voice was steady as she began reciting File 23, Drawer 17, Folder 13, Project Phoenix, transfers totaling $73,452,000. Elena gasped, her carefully groomed facade crumbling. "How do you? Those files were locked down." "She remembers everything," said Cecilia, who had come to stand beside the girl protectively. "Every spreadsheet, every overheard conversation, every paper she glimpsed in that office. It's all here," she said, gently tapping her temple. Just then, Charles stepped outside, drawn by the raised voices, and with him came the weight of truth. Emma walked to the barn, retrieving a small wooden box tucked beneath layers of hay. She returned with it in her arms. Inside were dozens of hand-drawn pages, flawless replications of contracts, emails, and classified charts. It was all there. In graphite and ink, her father's empire of lies exposed by a 6-year-old with a mind like a steel trap. "Numbers don't lie," Emma said again, the phrase heavier now, tinged with finality, "and I never forget a number." Suddenly, Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. The name Richard flashed on the screen. Her eyes darted between the women before her. Margaret, Cecilia, Emma. 3 generations standing together. The girl she thought was disposable had become the one person capable of unraveling everything, and she knew it. Fate had reshuffled every card that Wednesday morning. Eleanor's hand trembled as her phone buzzed endlessly, Richard's name blinking on the screen like a silent judgment. Clutching her box of sketches, Emma softly began to speak. File 15. Recorded conversation, March 3rd. Laura said no one would ever find out that the money was being moved offshore. "Stop talking," Eleanor snapped, her composure completely shattering. "You're just like your mother, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." It was the worst thing she could have said. But this time there was no white horse to step forward. Instead it was Charles, the millionaire who had pulled Emma from the river days before, who stepped between them, his presence calm but commanding, shielding Emma without a word. Elena, usually so composed, looked shaken. "Marina was my best friend," she muttered, anger and something dangerously close to guilt threading through her voice. "We were inseparable in college. I introduced her to Richard, thinking it would be a harmless fling." Margaret, leaning heavily on her cane, moved closer. "But she fell in love," she said, "and got pregnant." "Richard couldn't have a child out of wedlock," Elena burst out. "Not back then. Not with the conservative investors we had, so I came up with a plan." Sophie, her brilliant mind connecting invisible dots, opened her notebook and began furiously sketching a timeline. Names, dates, and connections she had memorized from files in her father's office. "You faked your own death," said Cecilia, watching the drawings take form. "Laura Whitman, Richard's devoted sister, died in an accident, and not long after, Elena Vaughan appeared." Margaret's voice turned bitter. "A sharp financial consultant, international finance specialist, and, conveniently, an expert at hiding money." The phone finally went silent. The yard was still, almost heavy with truth. Eleanor, Laura, seemed to age 10 years in that moment, Her cold, calculating eyes darted between the 3 generations of women now standing before her. "Marina found out, didn't she?" Margaret asked gently. "That's why she gave Emma to Richard. She hoped the presence of his daughter would finally make him tell the truth." Eleanor sighed. "She confronted me. Said she exposed everything. The fraud, my real identity, all of it. But then..." Her voice broke. "She got sick. Bad cells that grow where they shouldn't." Emma said, suddenly, her voice clear and strange. "Numbers that don't follow the right pattern." Margaret clutched her chest. The innocent precision in Sophie's voice echoed her own cancer diagnosis. A cruel math of genetics had touched them all. "But you never told Richard," Cecilia accused. "Even after Marina passed, even knowing Emma was your niece, you kept it hidden. You kept manipulating." "I built that empire," Eleanor cried, mascara streaking down her flawless cheeks. "Every deal, every merger, every acquisition, I was the one who turned our father's little firm into a powerhouse. Richard was just the pretty face. I was the mind." "I always was." Emma, quietly but with unmistakable intent, stepped toward Laura. Her eyes, clear, precise, and unblinking, like only those who see the world in patterns and data do, locked onto the woman who had once tried to erase her from existence. "Numbers lie when people make them lie," she said calmly. "But the truth always has a pattern, and patterns always leave a trace." Just then, the distant hum of tires on gravel made everyone turn. A sleek black sedan pulled up beside the one already there. From the driver's side stepped Charles Whitmore, the billionaire businessman. His expression twisted in disbelief as he took in the strange scene before him. "Laura, what is this? Why are you..." His voice faltered when his eyes landed on Emma, alive, breathing, holding a box overflowing with drawings he instantly recognized. Exact recreations of the confidential documents he thought were buried forever. "Hi, Dad," Emma said, her voice firm, unnervingly steady for a 6-year-old. "The numbers brought me back, and they've got a lot to say." Charles had built a reputation on being unshakable. For over 20 years in the cutthroat world of finance, he never let emotion sway his judgment. But standing now in front of his daughter, who he believed was lost, his knees nearly buckled. This can't be," he muttered, stumbling forward. You fell, I saw it." "I was saved by a man on his way to visit his daughter's grave," Emma said simply, her small hand tightening around the box of papers. "Because people don't lie the way numbers do. And grief doesn't cover up offshore accounts in the Caymans." Laura let out a strangled sound at the mention of the tax haven. Charles slowly turned to her, suspicion sharpening his eyes. "How does she know about the Caymans?" he asked. "She knows everything, Charles," Margaret cut in, her voice layered with the weight of years unspoken, "just like Marina knew. Do you remember Marina Green, the woman you once loved and then let go 7 years ago?" Charles's face drained of color. His gaze jumped between Emma and Margaret, finally seeing the truth reflected back in the girl's copper curls and piercing gaze. "Marina," he whispered, "but she never told me she was pregnant." "That's because I convinced her not to," Laura added with a bitter laugh. "And I convinced her to leave when we found out the baby would be different. You..." Charles breathed, turning to Laura, his voice laced with shock and fury. "How could you possibly know anything about Marina?" Emma, sensing the critical shift in momentum, opened her box and began spreading the contents onto the grass. Page after page of precisely redrawn spreadsheets, letters, and faded photographs covered the lawn. One photo showed 2 smiling college girls, Marina and a younger version of Laura, then still known as Laura Whitmore. The truth was no longer a secret hidden behind carefully managed assets or silent pain. It was laid bare on paper in ink, in Emma's memory, undeniable and immutable. And this time, no one could lie their way out. "Your sister didn't die in that car crash, Charles," Laura Whitmore said softly, her voice carrying the weight of revelation. She changed her identity. She became Elaine Vance, the financial strategist who showed up in your life a few years later. Charles staggered back, as if someone had struck him in the chest. Laura Whitmore stared at Elaine like she was seeing a stranger for the very first time. All this time, you were my sister. I did what had to be done, Laura snapped, her elegant composure finally crumbling. Dad was going to leave everything to you, even though I was smarter, more capable. So I came up with a new plan, a new identity. Every fraud, every accounting trick, that was my design. You were just the pretty face we put in front of the camera. Emma, who had been silent through the confrontation, stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension. File 42, red folder, third drawer, transfer of ownership, Santos Industries, inflated value by 340%, phantom buys in 3 different countries, signed Laura, not Laura Whitmore. She surged forward, rage overtaking her, but Charles was faster, instinctively stepping in front of Emma. You tried to kill her, he said quietly, the horror dawning on him in full. You manipulated me into thinking it was for the company, because she knew too much. She has that photographic memory, that compulsive honesty, Laura snapped back. She's just like Marina, Charles, incapable of understanding that sometimes the truth needs to be hidden. Then something unexpected happened. Emma walked up to her father, her tiny fingers clutching a carefully drawn picture. It was a perfect copy of an old photograph. Charles and Marina smiling together in a park. On the back, the exact message and date Marina had once written. Forever yours, no matter what. With love, Charles read aloud, his voice breaking. He kept it in a purple box under her bed, Emma said softly. She looked at it every night before falling asleep. Charles collapsed to his knees in the wet grass, his expensive suit soaking through. Tears streamed down his cheeks, finally shattering the steel mask of the ruthless businessman. I loved her, he confessed in a hoarse whisper. But when she disappeared, told me she'd moved on with someone else. I believed her. More lies. It was always lies. Evelyn cut in, her voice raw with sorrow. Marina died loving you, Charles. And she left Emma in your care, because she still believed there was goodness left in you. Off in the distance, dark storm clouds gathered, signaling the beginning of a storm. But in the yard of that quiet farmhouse, a different kind of storm had already begun. One made not of wind and rain, but of long-buried truths finally being spoken aloud. The first heavy raindrops fell like tears from the sky. Evelyn rushed to collect Emma's drawings from the porch, shielding the precious evidence from the porch. Charles remained kneeling in the grass, his shoulders sagging under the weight of guilt, while backed slowly toward her car. Don't even think about running, Evelyn warned, her frail frame somehow steely. The police are already on their way. I called them the moment I recognized you. As if on cue, the wail of distant sirens began echoing down the rural road. Elaine froze, her options evaporating. You don't understand, she said desperately. Everything I did, everything was to protect the family's legacy. Charles never would have built that empire alone. He was weak, too emotional. How dare you talk about family? Charles burst out, struggling to his feet. You lied about Marina's death. You manipulated everyone. You tried to get rid of your own niece. Nearby, Emma had been silently watching with her intensely perceptive eyes. Suddenly she began sketching rapidly in her notebook, ignoring the rain soaking the pages. Her fingers moved swiftly, drawing a complex map, connections only she could fully decipher. Aunt Laura isn't lying about everything, she said, her voice sharp and unwavering, slicing through the tension. The numbers show. Dad lost 3 major deals before she came back. As Elena, the company was in a nosedive, sales down 47%, net income down 62%. Charles blinked, startled not only by the accuracy, but also by the calm, impartial way Emma laid it all out. Just facts, no judgment. Then she returned, Emma went on, her fingers drawing invisible equations in the air. And the numbers rose again, but it was wrong, like an Escher staircase. Seems to go up, but leads nowhere. At that moment, the millionaire's sister Margaret stepped forward, just as the rain began pouring harder. She watched Emma with growing awe as the little girl broke it all down with mechanical precision. The sirens were getting closer now. Laura turned, glancing at her car, then back at the group. For the first time, uncertainty clouded her expression. "You have a choice," said Grace, the caretaker, gently but firmly. "You can run and prove us right, or you can finally do something good." But it was Emma who struck the final blow. Stepping forward, she held out one of her carefully drawn sketches to Laura. It was a portrait of Marina, smiling, full of warmth, the same look that had always made Laura feel small and bitter. "Mom always said numbers are like people," Emma quoted softly, repeating the words Marina used to whisper at bedtime. "Some are prime, some are friends, some stand alone, others work best together, but all have value, even the negative ones." Laura's knees buckled. She sank into the rocking chair on the porch, her guard crumbling with the weight of her own regret. "I loved her, you know," she confessed, tears blending with the rain streaking down her face. "Marina was my best friend, but she had everything I wanted. Richard's love, a gifted child. Even her cancer seemed more noble than the lies I built." Charles, who had quietly stepped closer, placed a trembling hand on his sister's shoulder. "Why didn't you tell me the truth? About who you were, about Marina, about Emma?" "Because you would have chosen them over me," Laura replied, her voice breaking. "And I couldn't handle losing you again." Just then, 2 police cars rolled into the gravel driveway, their lights flickering in the rain-puddled yard. Laura stood slowly, pulling her shoulders back with one last shred of dignity. "The numbers don't lie," she repeated Emma's words, a sad smile forming on her lips. "I think it's time I stopped lying too." As the officers approached, Emma instinctively reached for her father's hand. Charles looked down into his daughter's eyes, those clear, fearless eyes, and saw not judgment, but the same unshakable honesty that had once terrified him. "Can we fix the numbers?" Charles asked softly, his voice barely carrying through the damp air. He gently squeezed the small hand of the girl beside him, feeling, for the first time in years, the true weight of his past decisions and the hope for redemption offered by this extraordinary child. The rain began to ease as the officers guided Laura, once known as Laura Whitmore, into the back of the patrol car. She kept her head high, though her eyes revealed a deep, tangled mix of regret and relief. Before the door closed, Laura turned back toward Emma. "You're exactly like your mother," she said, voice almost tender. "And that's not a bad thing. Not anymore." Emma silently watched the car roll away, her fingers subconsciously ticking off seconds, raindrops, and the patterns they left behind. Beside her, Charles stood quietly near the porch, overwhelmed by the way his entire world had shifted in just one afternoon. For the first time, he didn't see Emma as a disruption or an unanswered question, but as someone remarkable. Someone who had not only survived abandonment, but emotional erasure. "She's got Marina's gift with numbers," Margaret murmured as she stepped beside her brother. "And the same pure heart. But there's something else, something uniquely hers. A way of seeing the world most of us never could." As if to prove the point, Emma knelt down in the wet earth with a stick and began sketching with delicate precision, crafting a complex design of symbols and numbers. She pointed at a spiral she had drawn. "This is how truth works," she said. "It starts small in the center, but grows following the Fibonacci sequence. It can't be stopped. It only expands." Charles felt his legs buckle slightly. Margaret quickly grabbed a lawn chair and helped him sit, both watching as Emma continued to etch out meaning in the soil. Each lie is like a negative number, Emma went on, her fingers moving with fluid intent. It might fix the problem temporarily, but then it multiplies. Again and again, until all the numbers go negative. So how do we fix that? Charles asked, his voice raw with emotion. Emma paused, thoughtful. Then, to everyone's surprise, she walked over, took her father's hand, and led him to the dirt drawings. First, she began, her tone almost like a gentle professor's, we need to acknowledge all the negative numbers. We can't pretend they're positive. Then, we start adding good things. A good action is like a positive number. The more we multiply, the more we shift the total. Margaret and Cecilia shared a knowing look. There it was, again, Marina's wisdom, refracted through Emma's brilliant, unique mind. A roadmap to redemption spoken in the only language Charles truly understood. The documents you drew, Charles said hesitantly, the ones that prove all the fraud, are you going to turn them in? I already did, Emma replied plainly. While you were talking, Grandma took pictures of everything with her phone and sent them to the district attorney. He said he'll be here in approximately 43 minutes, accounting for traffic and weather. Charles couldn't help the trembling smile that spread across his face. That timing, that precision, it was so perfectly, unmistakably Emma. I'm going to lose everything, aren't I? The company, my name? Richard murmured, his voice barely holding together. Not everything, Emma replied gently, squeezing her father's hand. Numbers can be negative and turn positive again. People can too. Just then, Charles Whitmore stepped out onto the porch and slowly approached them. The man who had once saved Emma from the river, on the very day he had meant to visit the grave of his own daughter, watched the moment unfold in silence. He had come to understand in the days since that some things in life are not coincidence. Your grandfather? Margaret added from nearby, her voice soft with memory. Used to say horses are the truest judges of character, don't care about bank accounts or boardrooms. They only see what's in your heart. She looked to Charles, and he didn't hesitate. He saw something in Emma worth saving. Maybe something it took the rest of us too long to see, Margaret finished, her voice catching, that there are things more valuable than money or power. Emma still held her father's hand as she began humming a tune, a gentle, haunting melody. Richard's eyes widened in recognition. That song, Marina used to hum it, he said, startled by the flood of memory. It was the same old lullaby they'd whispered together on quiet nights long ago. A song about starting over, about finding one's way back. Do you remember it? He asked, his voice cracking. I remember everything, Emma answered. Happy numbers and sad ones, songs and silence, love and fear. Everything stays right here, she said, tapping her temple, waiting for the right moment to make sense. The storm had cleared now, and a wide rainbow arced across the Oregon sky. Emma, always observant, turned her eyes toward the light, immediately calculating the angle of refraction. She found comfort in the symmetry and order, even in nature's most fleeting displays. Just then, the district attorney's SUV pulled up, its tires kicking up the damp gravel on the newly dried driveway. Margaret met the official at the door, ready to hand over the evidence. Meanwhile, Richard stayed outside on the porch, sitting beside his daughter, under an old pecan tree that had stood on the property for generations. Why aren't you angry with me? He asked finally, almost whispering. After everything I did? Everything I tried to do. Emma tilted her head in that thoughtful way she had when solving something difficult. Her fingers played with the twig, drawing invisible calculations in the dirt. Anger, she said after a pause, is like multiplying by negative numbers. It might look right at first, but it doesn't solve the real equation. What's the real equation? Richard asked, his curiosity overtaking his shame. "Love," she replied plainly. "Mum always said love is like pi, infinite and impossible to fully calculate, but essential to understanding the circles of life." Richard felt the tears well again. Marina had always had that way of explaining the universe with metaphors that went straight to the heart. And now, here was their daughter, carrying that same wisdom. A gift he had nearly destroyed with his own fear. Just then, Beau, the horse Charles had rescued with, the one Emma had bonded with, approached the old bench. He nudged Emma softly with his nose, then, unexpectedly, did the same to Richard. "He's forgiving you too," Emma whispered. Horses are good at emotional math. They add true regret and subtract false pride. From the porch, Margaret watched them with misty eyes and a tightening in her chest. It wasn't just reconciliation unfolding, it was redemption, wrapped in numbers, memory, and love. In all her years working with horses, Margaret had never seen anything quite like it. A bond so deep, so instinctive between a child and an animal, it felt like witnessing something sacred. It was then that Emma did something that took everyone by surprise. With the effortless grace she always showed around horses, she climbed up onto Scout, the gentle gelding who had been her constant companion since her rescue, without needing a hand. She turned toward her father and extended a hand. "Come," she invited. "I want to show you something." Charles hesitated. "I've never ridden before." "Trust the numbers," Emma said calmly. "The chance of falling is less than 2% if you follow my exact instructions." With Margaret's steady guidance, Charles managed to get up behind his daughter. Sensing the man's unease, Scout stood completely still until he found his balance. "Where are we going?" Charles asked, gripping Emma's waist tightly. "To the bridge," she answered. "We need to solve the whole equation." Charles's breath caught. His chest tightened. "Emma, I can't go back there." "Yes, you can," she replied with that unwavering mathematical confidence that had become her signature. "The Pythagorean equation can only be solved by going back to the point where they first went wrong." Inside the house, Margaret paused mid-sentence in her statement to the state investigator, her eyes drawn to the window. There she saw Scout trotting gently down the dirt path, carrying Charles and Emma toward a place filled with memory and consequence. Deep in her heart, she knew this was necessary. The late afternoon sun dipped low as they reached the bridge. The river beneath still surged, swollen by recent rain, growling like a warning. Charles felt every muscle in his body tense. It was here, on this span of steel and shadow, that he had nearly destroyed his own blood. Emma slipped down gracefully and walked to the railing. Her fingers touched the cool metal, and she began to speak. At 3:27 and 42 seconds on a Tuesday, a father forgot how to calculate the value of love. He subtracted when he should have added. He divided when he should have multiplied. Charles dismounted, legs trembling. Scout remained close, his calm presence like a living anchor. "But today," Emma continued, "at 5:15 and 33 seconds on a Friday, we're rewriting the equation. Because even broken numbers can be fixed, if you know what operation to use." She turned to face her father. Her eyes sparkled, not with tears, but with a wisdom far beyond her years. "The operation is forgiveness," she declared. "It's like a square root. It seems complex at first, but it transforms negative numbers into positive possibilities." Charles dropped to his knees, his frame shaking with quiet sobs. He had no words, no defense, no more lies. Emma, with the same precision she used when solving equations, wrapped her arms around him in a hug that was neither too tight nor too loose, just enough to begin healing wounds too deep for measurement. What followed in the days ahead was nothing short of transformative. Charles's once unshakable corporate empire crumbled under the weight of the evidence his daughter had drawn from memory. Every newspaper ran the story. The mogul who came clean because his daughter reminded him what love meant. And as for Elena, Laura! She took a plea deal, trading full transparency for reduced sentencing. She gave up everything because she knew now the numbers never lied. But Emma remembered everything, and she always told the truth. At her very first meeting with federal investigators, everyone was taken aback when Elena stated, "Ask Sophia. She remembers every number, every transaction, every document. And unlike me, she only knows how to tell the truth." Back on the quiet, rural estate of Mrs. Clara Whitmore, once a simple farmhouse, now an unexpected sanctuary, Sophia was settling into a rhythm of her own. Each morning she rose with the sun, spending her early hours exploring the fields with the horses. And in the afternoons she helped the authorities, translating her photographic memory into concrete evidence. "It's like solving a giant puzzle," she explained one day to Margaret, her newly found grandmother, who was now balancing her cancer treatments with precious time beside her granddaughter. "Each number is a piece, and when you line them all up, they tell a story." Charles Whitmore, Sophia's father, had voluntarily turned himself in. As part of his plea deal, he was granted parole on the condition of full cooperation. His mornings were consumed by exhaustive interviews, but his afternoons were reserved for Sophia. And it was during one of those golden hour walks that something remarkable began to blossom. While watching the horses grazing in the adjacent pasture, Sophia remarked, "They have patterns too, you know. Just like me. Some don't like loud sounds. Others need the same routine every day. They're different, not broken." What seemed like a simple observation sparked something deep within Charles. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Charles called Clara and Margaret to the porch. He spoke with a passion none had seen in him before. "What if we turned this place into something new?" he said, hands moving with excitement. "An equestrian therapy center, just for autistic children." Sophia could help design it. Use her gift with numbers and her connection with animals. Clara, who had witnessed firsthand the emotional healing horses could provide, felt her chest tighten with emotion. She was already picturing what needed to be changed, doing silent math in her head. "We need special facilities, trained staff," she began. "I'll fund it," Charles interjected quickly. "Not with blood money." "That's done. I sold my penthouse, the cars. I want to use that money to build something real. Something that honors Marina's memory and the brilliance of our daughter." Margaret, still fragile from her latest round of chemo, brushed a tear from her cheek. Marina always believed that everything, even the worst things, happened for a higher purpose. The next morning, when they shared the idea with Sophia, her response was pure Sophia. Without saying a word, she grabbed her notebook and began sketching blueprints, complete with exact angles and carefully calculated measurements. "We need ramps at a 12.5-degree incline," she explained, her small hands flying over the paper. "And the stables need specific color patterns. Some kids are sensitive to certain shades." As if sensing he was part of something bigger, the horse that had bonded with her most deeply, Benny, wandered over and peered over her shoulder, examining the sketches. Sophia looked up and gave him one of those rare, radiant smiles that made everything seem possible. "We're going to help other kids who see the world through numbers and patterns," Emma announced with quiet determination. "And the horses will help us, because they don't judge. They only add love and multiply understanding." As Charles sat on the bench watching his daughter direct the morning session, he felt something stir inside him, something deeper than the hollow pride he once felt closing million-dollar deals. This was real. "You know what your mum once told me," he said, lowering himself beside Emma. "Sometimes we need to get completely lost in order to find the right path." Emma paused mid-calculation, her pencil hovering. "Like in geometry," she replied. "Sometimes you have to make a full rotation to understand the whole circle." Just then, Margaret returned from checking the stables with a look of amazement. "The vet just called," she said, removing her gloves. "That mare we rescued last month, she's having twins. That's incredibly rare." Emma didn't miss a beat. "2 new beginnings," she murmured, already calculating the statistical odds in her head. "Like me and Dad." The math of the universe, it seemed, had a strange sense of humor. And so, among numbers, horses, and second chances, a new chapter was being written at the old Whitmore Ranch. A story where differences were never defects, and past mistakes lay the foundation for a better future. 6 months later, the ranch had become something remarkable. The North Star Center, a name Emma herself had chosen, was now a thriving therapy program for children on the autism spectrum. Guiding stars, she explained, are like prime numbers, unique and essential for finding your way. That particular morning, the sunrise stretched lazily over the renovated property. Emma, now more confident than ever, led a line of young riders through a carefully designed trail. Every curve, every obstacle had been mapped with mathematical precision for therapeutic benefit. "Keep a distance of 3 meters and 42 centimeters between the horses," she instructed, her clear voice blending technical precision with natural warmth. It's the perfect spacing to stay in rhythm and harmony." Charles watched from behind the fence, wearing jeans and a plain flannel shirt, a far cry from the custom suits he used to favor. He held a notebook in his hand, tracking each child's progress. Part of his parole agreement required him to show how the recovered funds from his past wrongdoings were being reinvested into the community. But he didn't need a court order to do this. He wanted to. Margaret, now stronger after completing her latest round of treatment, managed the center's day-to-day operations. Her upstairs bedroom had been turned into a sunny office overlooking the pastures, allowing her to rest while keeping a watchful eye over the work she loved. What none of them could deny was this: the life they had all known had ended the day Charles stopped on that bridge. But what had begun since then, a journey of redemption, healing, and unexpected family, was something no business plan could ever predict. The upstairs room in the farmhouse had quietly become a perfect lookout. Margaret called it her eagle's perch. From there, she could rest and still keep an eye on everything happening below. Marina would be bursting with pride, she often said with a warm smile, as she watched little Emma working with the other kids. But the most profound change wasn't what happened around Sophie. It was what happened within her. What once was considered a barrier, her unusual way of seeing the world through numbers and repeating patterns, had blossomed into a treasured gift. Emma had designed her own teaching method, seamlessly blending math and horseback riding in a way that fascinated both children and parents. When a horse trots, she explained to a group of amazed parents, its hooves follow a precise pattern. It's like an equation in motion. Learning that rhythm helps children find their own balance. Cecilia, who now led the horse training program, had grown adept at matching the right horse with each child. Like Emma Woe says, she'd tell new staff members, horses are like numbers. Each one has its own personality, its own unique value. That particular afternoon, something out of the ordinary was about to happen. Elena, still serving her sentence but granted supervised release for volunteer work, was scheduled to visit the center for the first time. Surprisingly, it had been Emma Woe first suggested she be included in the project. "Aunt Laura understands numbers like I do," she had said thoughtfully. "She just used them the wrong way. Now she can learn to add good things." As the police vehicle pulled up and parked at the farm's entrance, the atmosphere shifted to a hushed anticipation. Eleanor stepped out, visibly tense, her prison-issued uniform a stark contrast to the bright colors worn by the children. It wasn't a horse that broke the silence this time. It was Charles Whitmore himself. Walking beside Emma, she sat atop her pony, leading her gently forward. To everyone's surprise, Emma leaned down from the saddle and said softly, "He's giving you a second chance." Her voice carried a wisdom well beyond her years. Horses are good at measuring the real worth of people. even when they're still figuring it out themselves. Laura, who hadn't cried in years, felt warm tears slide silently down her cheeks. "How can you be so kind, Sophie, after everything I did? Because kindness is like pie," Emma replied as she dismounted gracefully. "It doesn't end. It just goes on and on, no matter how many times you try to calculate it." Richard stood nearby, quietly absorbing the scene, and felt something stir in him. Something no corporate victory had ever given him. His family, once broken, was healing. Like Emma once told him, they were a complicated equation, full of tough variables, but still solvable. As the late afternoon sun dipped lower, the group gathered for a meaningful ceremony, the unveiling of the center's dedication plaque. Sophie, with her usual mathematical precision, had insisted the plaque be installed at a very specific angle. 45 degrees, she explained, is the perfect angle so the morning sun can shine directly on the words, where different ways of seeing the world come together. As the final rays of sunlight bathed the newly restored property in a warm golden glow, a diverse group gathered in front of the dedication plaque. There stood a former businessman seeking redemption, a reformed fraud learning the meaning of truth, 2 elderly women who had discovered renewed purpose, 15 extraordinary children accompanied by hopeful parents, and at the heart of it all, a remarkable 6-year-old girl who had turned her unique way of seeing the world into a gift for others. Charles stood close by Emma, always watching over her, his eyes soft with pride. The millionaire who once believed he'd lost everything had, in truth, found a new beginning. The man who dove into the river to save a child had become part of something far greater. This wasn't just a center for therapy. It was a sanctuary, a place where being different wasn't a flaw, where patterns didn't have to be broken to be beautiful again, and where love could be measured in infinite positive possibilities.